I was born here, so in Cape Town, so that's where my life began. And I was educated in London and in America. And I kept on coming back to visit my family, and then commissioned first house for the mother, you know. Pain in the arse, she really was, quite terrible. And and in the process I met Tony, and you know, so, and we taught at the University of Cape Town, and then we went to the States. Yeah. Anyway, a long career, and right now I'm Dean at MIT and have a practice on the side.
Yeah. Well, I was born in Mozambique in what was then Lorenzo Marques, today Maputo. And that is, if you know Pancho, that's Pancho land, and all his buildings were going up around me as I grew up, so the idea of architecture was very early implanted. And I wanted to go all kinds of places to study, but ended up at Wits in Johannesburg, and then eventually transferred to Cape Town. And at that point, Roelof Buchard, who I'm sure you all know of, and his buildings, he just returned from the BRA from the States where he studied at Penn. And all the students, we were fairly advanced students here, but he was like a breath of fresh air, and we all gathered around him. It was an informal practice on his part. And we got a few commissions, I got a few commissions and so on, and then Adèle came on the scene and we joined forces. And a few years later, after having worked on fairly large projects, including a very large urban design project in Johannesburg with Roelof and a consortium, and at one point we decided that we wanted to go back to the States, and that was that. And I've been in practice and teaching ever since, and did a lot of work in Africa in the 80s and early 90s, mainly self-built work, housing and so on, and gone on practicing, and today I teach infrastructure planning and design at NJIT in the New York area.
By the way, we haven't seen each other for 20 years, so this is kind of a rather strange occasion. This house here belonged to Margaret Martino, and she was the client. And she had 5 children, 5 houses. So it wasn't speculative, if you will, it was a family affair.
We didn't have anything built, so a few things were under construction, and she first came to us to subdivide the property, because we were advertised ourselves as planners at that point. So that was the idea, we just subdivide the property into 5.
You know, to begin with, this was a garden. There had been, Tony reminded me, there had been a house here once that had actually burnt down. And so there were these very mature trees, many quite rare specimens. And so part of the deal was that since she lived up there, and this was, you know, now the subdivision, it was easy to put the road here because there was a line of oak trees which aren't all here anymore. But we actually built around the trees because we actually basically said we're going to keep the trees. And so, you know, by the time you got our subdivision plus the trees, you know, and we had some ideas about these houses, so hence the commission. But the other thing was that she looked down on these houses, so conceptually we saw them as a landscape. And so they actually had planted roofs.
The idea was, again, from this side, from the public side, that they have a very low scale. They'd be very private, but low scale, just one story, the walls and so on. And then as you move through the house, which is linearly arranged, it opened up to the gardens, and then all the mountains and all the landscape would come into effect.
We started with the walls, and then the idea, and this is our client was very keen on this, no walls between the houses and the gardens, so that you'd have the vista of the gardens, of each other's gardens, frankly, and still got the privacy. And so you'll notice as you go into these houses, they're kind of complementary. On the one side opens up a bit, on the bedroom side it displays, the other side it's pretty blank, and so, you know, that was part of the story. And I think, we never wanted you to be able to see actually directly into a room. As you opened the door, you kind of always get these vistas through into the garden. Number one was in a way the prototype, and then there were variations on the theme, depending honestly on the trees. And then when you get to the last one, there was a grove of trees, so we wrapped the house around the trees. So each one is unique, in fact. Conceptually, this was all a garden, a landscape, if you will. You'll see there's stepped ramps that come up from the garden all the way up to solaria, and each building has a solarium that's completely private. We used to joke you could lie there in the nude and nobody'd see you, except within your own house. And I think those are probably, you can see them over there, each house. So just look out for those atria.